very happy to have Terri Adams with us today from the Department of Sociology and Criminology at Howard University, where she's a full professor there. And she's also, in addition to this laundry list of positions that she is a co-thrust leader for the disaster thrust within AI-SDM. So get ready for this list. She's also Associate Dean of the Office of External Affairs at Howard, the Deputy Director of the NOAA Cooperative Science Center in Atmospheric Sciences and Meteorology at Howard, and the Director of the Howard University Initiative of Public Opinion. So in addition to all of those great roles, she also is a staunch supporter of AI-SDM. And her talk today is on the role of uncertainty in decision-making. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the slides here and share the screen. And if you would all please welcome Terri to the podium. Interview. Okay. Yep. Over here. I just need to share the screen with the Zoom folks. Sorry, it's a preemptive introduction.
It happens.
Okay. All right, now all of our Zoom friends should be able to see the slide deck and hear us, and they will let me know if not. And you have the presenter view here as well, if you need it.
Awesome. Thank you, Norm.
Let's go call. So, there you go. Yeah, maybe just use the keys for now.
Sure.
Welcome, Terri.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for having me. I'm really happy to be here and talk to you about some of the work I've been engaged in over the years that I thought might be useful for you to have an awareness of, and for me to talk through some important points I think that are critical when we're thinking about disaster response and how to improve prediction models, as well as how to improve tools for assisting people who are doing disaster response work. So moving along here, we're gonna talk about these. Are we moving along? No. So just click the.
Yeah, so all you should have to do is, once we're here, yeah, if you just use the arrow keys from here.
Okay, I thought I did. Maybe I didn't.
Yep, should be good.
Okay,
Oops. Oh, sorry, the transition got me.
that's okay. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna just do a brief introduction of the topic for today. We're gonna review a couple of case disaster scenarios. We're gonna talk a little bit about critical decision points and the impact of uncertainty on decision-making. Talk about 2 research studies and do a summary of the findings and implications for the Institute, as well as talk a little bit about current and future projects. So hopefully I can do all of that in the time allotted, which should be more than enough time actually, because I know you all don't want to be here past.
I thought you might want to stay another day.
No. We'll get through this. So just to give you a little bit of background, why did I get interested in this work, or why this work really? Really, Hurricane Katrina was a disaster that captured my attention and the attention of masses of people in this country, just trying to figure out what happened, how could people be stranded in this country waiting on resources when we can do so much around the world, and we send people out into space, like to the moon, like why can't we get supplies to people on time? So that really got me interested in this work. But I've been fortunate to conduct research in both international and domestic contexts, looking at a variety of different issues, including short and long-term impacts on first responders and first responder communities, looking at risk perceptions and risk communication, how that influences responses by the public, and then just looking at vending decision-making during disasters as it relates to emergency managers. Some of these pictures are just some of the students that I've worked with over the years and are in various places. So hopefully this video will work, but if not, again, why is this work important? We know that, you know, natural disasters are happening more often in various places. Each year, here in this country, we face a high number of natural disasters. I think the last year, where I looked at data, there were 28 major natural disasters in the year 2023. While dramatic events such as Hurricane Katrina that I referenced earlier really brings masses of people awareness to what's taking place, there are other kinds of disasters that are happening that people aren't necessarily focused on unless it's happening in your community. And then, of course, worldwide, disasters have been increasing over the last 20 years. Been over 7,000 disasters in the world, resulting in 1.2 million deaths and close to $3 trillion between the years 1960 and 2023. The number of disaster events have more than doubled. So we know that as the planet continues to warm, it pushes more humidity and precipitation events. I said that wrong. Let me double back. As the planet continues to warm, conditions are ripe for increased risk for severe weather events, particularly severe storm precipitation events. So this work is important because disasters are going to continue to happen. So, you know, if you think of one word that really captures the essence of what takes place during a disaster, I would argue that it's uncertainty. While you can plan ahead for certain kinds of conditions as an event is unfolding, there are many different pieces to what's taking place that many people would argue weren't totally predictable. And even if there's some components that are, how they play out is not always predictable. So there's a great deal of uncertainty involved in that. And as emergency managers, first responders, and the public seek to maximize their response efforts to disasters, it's essential to understand how uncertainty plays a key role in decision-making. So for the focus of this talk, we're going to talk about the increased risk of natural disasters that I've already mentioned, and how we are all, those of us who are part of the Institute, you know, we're really tasked with coming up with useful ways for assisting the people that are on the ground responding to these events. So today, the focus of this, the work today will be really focused on two areas: adoption of AI decision support, as well as timely and personalized interventions. And so this workshop, we're going to explore the impact of uncertainty on decision-making during high consequence events. Sometimes I'll toggle between disasters and high consequential events, but it's really meaning the same thing. And hopefully the discussion will provide some insights for you all on some of the needs of the first responder communities and things that we can do to better facilitate decision-making. So I wasn't sure quite where to fit this. So I'm going to talk about these critical decision points, some aspects of it right now, and then later on, I'll double back to this. But there are four basic phases of a disaster. You have the mitigation phase, which is way before disaster happens, where policymakers folks in, at the local level decide where, how they're going to place their resources to address vulnerabilities and potential disasters. And then you have the preparedness phase. The preparedness phase really comes when you know that there's a threat coming and you're really looking to, make sure that you have your folks ready and prepared to respond to the threat. Response includes the implementation of the preparedness plans, and you're really focusing in on mainly search and rescue at that point. And that's usually right after the onset of the threat, the onset of the hurricane, the onset of the tornado, or whatever, or earthquake, whatever the natural hazard is. And then, of course, recovery is after the event has passed, the response phase has passed, meaning search and rescue missions are over, and you're looking to basically rebuild the community. And you're seeking at that time to deal with the stress of the folks who have been working and endlessly, tirelessly, to make sure that people have what they need. That means I've talked too long on this one slide here. But also to reduce the vulnerabilities for the next potential incident, the next potential disaster or threat. So I was thinking, what case study can I use? I went back and forth, should I go with these two or two more recent ones? But I wanted to touch on two that I've done extensive work on in some phase or another. And I could have gone with Hurricane Maria or Harvey, but we landed here. So almost everybody in this country's heard of Hurricane Katrina. It was a Category 3 storm that made landfall in the Gulf Coast. Back in 2005, it was a major catastrophic event. And it was one of those things that happened where the public turned its attention, policymakers turned their attention, and a great deal of thought went into what happened, why it happened, and how can we do better. So as we look at the pre-disaster, was this event forecasted? Yes. The National Hurricane Center predicted it 2.5 days before the storm hit. It was a spot on prediction. The storm changed from Category 5 to Category 4 and ended up with 3 as it hit the Gulf Coast. But they issued hurricane watches and warnings, and there was a high level of confidence that the storm was going to hit. Nobody thought that the predictions were off. But people on the ground, people who live in New Orleans are like, we've had storms before. Some people thought we could weather the storm, even though it looked like it was going to be this major thing. Not everybody processed it the same. About 24 hours before the storm made landfall, there was also predicting that the storm surge was going to be really high. Yes.
So I have a question sort of related to this. So
Uh-huh.
I guess I remember hearing this with the hurricane that happened. I forgot the name of it, but the one that happened pretty recently in like St. Petersburg, Tampa.
Yeah.
Do you, in your work and different things, is there like a cost associated with like evacuating? And so
Yes.
people say like, oh, we've seen this before, it's not worth it to me.
Right.
Are in this research and area, is there like a monetary value that people say like, oh, it's gonna cost, like, it's technically gonna lose like $300 per day for me if I evacuate. No way am I leaving, versus someone who's like, it's only $30 a day for me if I leave.
Right.
I'm out of here.
Yes, so for sure. Both the policymakers or the emergency managers, the policymakers and the emergency managers are thinking about the cost to the city,
Okay,
the county, wherever it's about to take place. Is it worth millions of dollars to move people? Is it worth loss of revenue to the city,
Yeah.
county, wherever? And then, of course, individual to leave.
Yeah.
And in the situation with Hurricane Katrina, those who did not evacuate right away given the option to stay at
It's
the
dome,
Superdome,
right? Yeah,
right? And that there's a general term that they refer to, um, places where people go to evacuate to, it's not popping in my head right now, but it's basically where
Evacuation center?
evacuation centers. Why didn't I think of that? I don't know, but thank you. So yes, to answer your question, yes, everybody's calculating cost. And do I want to even risk spending money I don't have to spend? And do I want to inconvenience myself? And then for some, there are other kinds of questions too. Can I take my pets? Will my property be protected if I leave? These kinds of issues. So ironically, about 13 months before Hurricane Katrina, there was a simulation that a bunch of agencies got together and did called Hurricane Pam. Hurricane Pam was predicted to be Category 3, serious wind damage, storm surge. Basically, everything that happened during Hurricane Katrina was predicted. And they estimated that they would need 1,000 shelters and that there was going to be a need for a lot of resources to be able to deal with a hurricane like this. So what do you think happened to the data that came out of the simulation?
It's sat in some files and no one looked at it.
Exactly, yes. Oh, sorry. During the mitigation and preparation phase, where Nagin ordered the mandatory call for evacuation 24 hours before the storm. First responders were given a day to really secure their own homes and get their family out of the harm's way. Police and firefighters were asked to go out to the communities to announce that there was a mandatory call for evacuation, meaning people who might not be watching TV or listening to the radio, to basically get the word out. People who were first responders, I should say, were tasked with getting resources to certain places. So in the city of New Orleans, they placed cars in certain locations, and they placed boats in the lower ninth ward, which ended up getting destroyed because of the breaches in the levee system. And many of the backup generators were located in basements to prevent being harmed by the wind, but of course, the flooding took out the generators. So the impacts, it's a lot of loss of life, billions of dollars in damages, 1,800 fatalities were counted, storm surge was out of control, the levee systems broke. You had 80% of the city submerged in water, inoperable communication systems, loss of first responders, stations, meaning like actual places where people would meet to make decisions were lost, including police headquarters. You had a lot of death and destruction and a lot of major infrastructure damage. And so it was, what I try to tell people is imagine that, you know how life, as you know what, in terms of your place where you work, where you live, where you go buy your groceries, and you know what's normal for you. Then you have this storm blow through and then everything's changed. Maybe your home is severely damaged. Maybe the place where you work no longer is standing, the building's inoperable. It could be where the place where you used to purchase your groceries is, no longer functioning, and many of your neighbors had to evacuate. So life has completely changed. And so while we know that first responders are trained to deal with anything, they are impacted by that sudden change as well. The other thing is that when you're dealing with this level of destruction, there's a lot of shifts in, it's a heavy impact on yourself emotionally, and people have a hard time adjusting sometimes. Many people go into automatic kind of like, that just start responding based on, what do they call it, muscle memory? But not everybody does that. So during this time, you had, at least in the city of New Orleans, you had reportedly 200 people actually, abandoned posts. But through talking with the leaders, it ended up being about 147. Nonetheless, a lot of people were afraid. Some people wanted to go help their families, and many reasons why people left. But I just try to make clear to people that it's a major emotional task to respond to an incident like this. You know, as one officer said, everything was in chaos. I could not locate my supervisor. Basically, it was every man for himself. So when these things are happening, people have to make decisions based on the information that they have, because there is a great deal of uncertainty. In order to respond to this, you have reliance on traditional communication strategies. They had, you ever play, well, gosh, nobody does this anymore because of technology, but back, I've seen this where people would take like, paper cups, and you talk through the paper cup and you see the person with another paper cup. You know what I'm talking about? Well, of course, they didn't do that, but they had a system set up where you had a group of officers located one place, and everybody would go to a central location near them to get the new information. So they had to come up with unique ways of getting information to themselves. Isolated officers and district commanders had to make assessments based on what they could see before they were able to establish these systems of communications. And as I mentioned, you know, boats were important during this time because you had 80% of the city submerged in water, but yet many of the boats that the first responders had access to were no longer available, so they had to commandeer boats from citizens. And of course, volunteers came in from around the country. Oops, no. Oh, these not have the new things that I put in. Okay, so you had a question?
Oh, and maybe you can talk about this later, but the recent fires in California, the slide you went to when you were just talking about like, so much was destroyed, every place you worked, people were in shock.
Yeah.
If we have time towards the end, will you talk about if there were parallels to what we've recently seen in California?
Happy to do that, yeah. Well, one thing I was gonna ask you all was, what was predicted? Was there anything that was predictable?
They did said that it predicted with high confidence that the storm was gonna hit New Orleans, a city, right? Which is not always the case, right? That like with high confidence, you're definitely gonna target a huge area.
Right, for sure.
So I'm a civil engineer.
Okay.
And like, some of this is there wasn't predictions on the levees necessarily, and so like, from a civil engineering perspective or different things, like, when I've looked at this, I'm like, this was a big challenge for like the levees breaking, it wasn't necessarily the existing infrastructure.
Right.
And so it didn't, I guess, like, what they knew, like, I don't know if they had a backup plan for when levees break. And I remember watching like Bush on TV and the helicopters and everything, and like seeing people wave. Ever remember this, the footage and people like waving on top of their homes? And being like, wait, like, they had a hurricane like last month in Florida, and this was the image.
Exactly.
And so I just remember also being really confused.
Right, yeah, I think most of the public, we were very confused. Yeah, so you both are right? So there was this uncertainty that it was going to hit, but there was this uncertainty about the impacts. So you think, okay, the city could, you know, probably withstand a Category 3 hurricane, even though the simulation of it.
The infrastructure could withstand.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. So, the point I'm trying to make is that while there's some things that are predictable, there's some that are not predictable, but it's potentially that if there's other sources of information and data points that can be assembled to really look at the full scope of possibilities, if people can start thinking about those things, it might be better for training and for mitigation preparation purposes. So the next, disaster we're gonna talk a little bit about, and I'll try to move a little bit faster here, is the Tohoku disaster in Japan. And of course, this was, a compound disaster, I mean, you had more than one at a time. The earthquake, which, triggered the tsunami, which both of the earthquake and the tsunami impacted Fukushima, the Fukushima disaster and caused the nuclear accident. So in terms of pre-disaster, just to give you a sense that in Japan, their way of operating is different in that they have a top-down approach. For us, our first responder services are very decentralized, meaning every local area you respond local. They always say that response is local, right? In Japan, it's different. There's very little to no warning for earthquakes, and I'll talk through a little bit of that, give you a little bit more information about that. And then for tsunami, it's 20 minutes or less. It could be for, I think in this particular case, the first one hit in 10 minutes. And then there's, of course, very little warning for the nuclear accident. Oops.
Terry, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Why, is it just a cultural thing as to why it's like top down versus decentralized, or is it like a
It's,
governmental thing, or where does that come in?
I would, well, because I'd studied, what happened in Chile too, and, one of their major earthquakes, and they have a top-down approach too. In some ways, it's better in that you can organize people to get to places. In other words, the police force across, the country can galvanize. They have the same set of principles. They can go into action quicker as a collective unit, the same with the fire departments. So that's great. The part that might not be so great is that while you do have people locally, the way that it's managed and responded to is just different. So whereas here in this country, everything is local, and then you have to, the mayor has to contact the governor has to contact the president before you can actually get help from FEMA, right? And so in this case, it took, longer than it should have, not this case, sorry, and during Hurricane Katrina. Whereas in Japan, the way things click into place is a little quicker on the national level. So it's like as my mom would say, 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. Depends on what lens you're looking through. Just really quickly here, the earthquake warning systems, you basically get a few seconds, a really short period of time. But once that is triggered, there are transportation services, meaning the trains slow down, power plants and energy sources shut down, and alarms go off at schools. That's the way the system is supposed to work, even though you might just get 3 seconds. If you can shut down those things, maybe there's less loss of life. And as a result of the earthquake, the number of deaths weren't that high. In terms of tsunamis, I mentioned before, you get from 10 minutes to hours. It depends on the location of where you are along the coast. And predicting when and where the next tsunami will strike is currently not possible in terms of being precise. However, warnings are issued, just like, if something happens in Japan, the west coast of this country is notified, right? Because there's a risk of a tsunami. But the precise predictions are not possible. With the Fukushima nuclear incident, the text here is not arguing that it was predicted. The text here is just highlighting information that there were reports that analysis showed that the power plant was at risk, basically. And there was one done in 2008, one done in 2009, but the power company basically didn't do anything with that information. So it's kind of like, there's a risk. Are you gonna spend the money to fix it, or are you gonna just take a chance, right?
I think they decided to take a chance.
I would say that so too. So, not gonna go through all of this. The earthquake caused few deaths, I mentioned this before, but it generated tsunami, which resulted in 200,000 people losing their lives. The failure of the Fukushima, of the nuclear power plant, shortly after the quake, um, caused an explosion and thousands of people lost their lives. This is a video, you're not gonna, I think there's sound to this, which I didn't really wanna play. And, maybe I won't play it, cause it's.
Play it.
Okay, all right.
Now we wanna know.
Right,
All across northern Japan.
this is from National Geographic.
A violent magnitude 9.0 earthquake on March 11th, 2011. It was centered about 80 miles offshore and tsunami warnings went up immediately. In coastal cities, people knew what to do next, run to higher ground. It's from these vantage points on hills and in tall buildings that incredible footage was captured. In Kesanuma, people retreated to a high-rise rooftop and could only watch in horror as tsunami waves inundated their city, knocking buildings into rubble and mixing into a kind of tsunami soup filled with vehicles, building parts, and contents. Seawater cascaded over sea walls and into cities. This video shows the water rushing over an 18-foot seawall in the Kamaishi City. The seawall here was the world's deepest and largest, but not enough for the magnitude of the March 11 disaster. It was the largest quake ever known in Japan and one of the 5 largest reported in the world. More than 28,000
You should actually move in buildings.
are confirmed dead or missing. When 2 tectonic plates push together under the sea, the resulting earthquake sends an enormous burst of energy up through the ocean, displacing enormous quantities of water. With the upward motion.
So we don't necessarily need this for the, unless you really wanna watch the rest of it. You want? All right. Basically, you're given anywhere from 10 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe over that time, maybe even an hour, depending on where you are again along the coast. But you have this massive influx of water and, that has the strength to move cars, to move buildings. It's an enormous image, as you all watched, right? And if you can imagine actually experiencing that and then having to respond to it. And so while they do have or did have a warning system, not all the warning systems worked. In some communities that where the police and firefighter knew about the earthquake, they asked people to stay indoors. And of course, they weren't aware or weren't thinking about the possibility of a tsunami. And if you Google tsunami in Japan, you'll see, I saw it looked like it was an Instagram or something kind of social media clip where it actually showed a truck driving down a hill and then it looked like the driver saw what was happening and then turned around. So many residents who were trying to escape by car ended up being engulfed by the tsunami. Mhm.
So thinking through that, like here in Pittsburgh, it's pretty quick, pretty easy for us to get to a top of a hill fairly quickly, I
Mhm.
think. But like, I'm from Chicago and like, you can't get, even though I guess like, it's not really on the ocean, but
Yeah.
other places in certain geographies, like you can't get to a top of a hill. Or if you
Yeah.
think about a place like New York City and they have to, let's say, get higher up,
Yeah,
like, it's not, how do you move like 12 million people?
right.
So I'm curious in this, in different aspects of it, how much of it was like also calculated with what's actually feasible for people to move in 10, 20 minutes? Because I don't know if you've ever sat through traffic in Manhattan, but like you can't get anywhere in 10 minutes.
Right, yeah, when you put it like that, there are. Oh, how do I say this? There's a high chance that you're not gonna be able to save everybody. That's just a fact, right?
Yes.
But if there's a possibility of improving warning systems, if there's a possibility in people knowing, okay, after this, there's a high chance of this other,
Secondary effect, right?
yes,
Yes,
thank
Like you
you.
felt the tremors, you're at a coastal place, you should be trained to know you get to high ground.
Immediately to
because
get
there's
to
gonna
high
be-
ground.
Okay, and
Right,
I guess in the
but-
risk planning.
In
that's-
risk
that's
planning,
part of it
exactly.
Too, so there's
Right.
like designated routes or different, I guess just like,
But
trying to
as you
figure out-
mentioned, if
yeah.
you're in New York City, where
Yeah.
there's hundreds of thousands of people, the
Millions.
chance of everybody getting to the top of a building, yeah. It's, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And so
So-
does that go in your risk calculations and your, and risk simulation, different things, like population density and the topography, is that still a huge factor, or is it just like notification systems?
I think it has to be both,
Okay,
yeah, for sure. Oops, I have a Mac, so I'm clicking what I would click on the Mac, so forgive me for that. Yeah, the result of the Fukushima crisis, you had, 170,000 people had to be evacuated. And, yeah, it's just, if you can imagine one crisis after another for a country to deal with, it was tremendous. This was a quote from someone that we interviewed. It was actually a high-ranking leader, in the fire department. He talked about taking a drink every time he left, work in order to deal with the disaster, because that's how, horrible it was. So again, I try to re-emphasize that we know that these people are out there working, risking their lives, but it has a tremendous impact on them emotionally and sometimes it's long-term impacts. So over 18,000 people lost their lives. And in addition to all those, the earthquake, the tsunami, and the nuclear disaster, you also had fires that broke out. And communication systems were down. Did I miss anything else on that other slide? Yeah. So I'll run through these pretty quickly. In terms of there were, as I mentioned, communication systems were down. Broadcast towers were severely impacted. Past experiences of disasters, I think we were talking about this earlier, Gretchen, impacted how people responded. So that what you know has happened in the past, and I'll talk a little bit about this later on. Sometimes people move into system one thinking where they're just going into automatic reactions, or you're using heuristics to respond. And so instead of thinking about what should take place in the new sets of circumstances, or the new set of data points, I should say. In terms of spatial challenges, shortage of living necessities, shortage of gas, major issues with the transportation arteries. This part here I've discussed already, but I do think it's important for people to realize that when a tsunami is going to happen, your level of risk and the timing of it depends on where you are along the coast. Buildings, in terms of the, geography or geographical kinds of considerations, buildings in areas designed for evacuation were submerged under waves of the tsunami. After waves of the tsunami subsided, it took weeks for the seawater to come down to where, they could actually dealing with the debris and, trying to save as much as possible. Basically for the search and the rescue and recovery efforts to kick in. The systems were overwhelmed in terms of this response. Military and the police worked collaboratively to respond to rescue as many people as possible. Similar to the situation with Katrina, people had to rely on different forms of communication. They relied on the radio, satellite phones, and face-to-face communication. Japan has a mutual aid system that allowed for quick coordination efforts, that I mentioned before. I actually meant to move this one earlier, but this was a reaction from a NOPD officer where he talked about his house being completely submerged in water and that he himself was forced to wait on top of a roof to be rescued. He said, I was distraught from the incident at my house, but they wanted me to patrol the streets. I was not mentally ready to work and needed time to regroup, but I was told that I did not have the luxury of time. So in terms of common challenges, non-functioning transportation systems, eruption in communication pathways, serious miscommunication, shortages of supplies. There was some disconnection between executive level officers and the reality of what's actually on the ground. So not having a full scope of what's actually taking place, past experiences informing current responses, fear and concern among the citizens, concerns for the loved ones among the first responders, and then just mental and physical exhaustion. So key findings, fatigue impacts decision-making, which leads to role strain. Personal concerns impact decision-making, leading to role conflict. Limited sources of information complicate decision-making. However, resilience prevails. So in terms of the critical decision points, these are some questions. I'm not gonna go through all three, but as we start to think about what are some of the things that, as an institute, what are some of those key points in the decision-making process that tools can be developed to help first responders make better decisions? These are some of the things that have to be taken into consideration. How much of available resources are they willing to put into practice? As Samsara mentioned earlier, how much are you willing to pay for now so that later on you don't have bigger costs, right? If something was to happen. As the saying goes, you will invest in what you think. As the saying goes, will you invest in what you think might happen versus what you need to pay for today? How to properly prepare? Where do you place your supplies and resources? When do you allow your workers to go and take care of their families, their loved ones, and their property? When should you call for an evacuation? Should you issue a mandatory versus a voluntary evacuation? That's some of the things that Gretchen and I are looking at. What do you do with tourists? See, I had taken this out, but my dad's girlfriend was actually in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, and she stayed because she was a tourist. So many of the tourists weren't actually evacuated. When you seek and rescue victims, do you know the level of damage where victims are actually located? When do you seek outside assistance? What do you do when you get volunteers? How do you manage them? How do you get food and supplies to your staff? How do you know when should your staff actually get rest breaks? When, how often, and what do you communicate with the public? That's major. This piece right here for public opinion is important. Do you give the public all the information? Do you give them some? Do they have the right to all the information? What should be shared and when should it be shared? Implications for the work here, I kind of hinted at some all along the way. Hold on one second. I shared my drive with Norm, but I made some changes and not all the changes were made, so forgive any change typos that are here, but disaster response preparedness activities really are developed based on perceived risk and what people think could potentially happen. However, there's a full range of possibilities that might be out of the purview of people who are in the room making those decisions. I believe that, AI can help decision makers better gain a full sense of the range of possibilities, given different kinds of data points. And it can be used to help people make better decisions, to plan forward and to think about unique situations that might be not in their scope of understanding at this point. There are gaps of information, as I kind of talked a little bit here about, for each critical decision point during a disaster. AI can be useful for understanding or helping people potentially see a broader scope of what's unfolding. The critical decision points have high degree of uncertainty. And when people are most fatigued, they may be more willing to use those tools, to use or to rely on AI. So, how does uncertainty impact decision making? Just gonna quickly go through some key, yeah. I had highlighted words that I wanted to just focus on, but again, the slides didn't update. But, you know, there's research that suggests that threatening, uncertainty triggers emotions. Others argue that it can lead to affective reactions, meaning physical and emotional, responses. Many of us believe that this is a great time of uncertainty, now that we're living through. And, some of us are having those physical and emotional responses. But uncertainty itself can be a very powerful stressor. It has a significant impact on, as I mentioned earlier, your physical and emotional well-being. Human indecisiveness can lead to playing it safe, so that if there's a high degree of uncertainty, people might resort to the safe decision and not necessarily the decision that is the best decision at the time. The most important piece here is reliance on heuristics and potential biases, system one thinking, and that it can lead to delayed decision-making, over-reliance on incomplete information, and, yeah, yes,
So I've met people like, who are like, I'm great under pressure. When there's a really tough decision, like, I can always rise to the occasion, I'm naturally really good at it.
yeah.
Is that just like a load of BS?
No, I think there's some people who are, yeah, I know people who are calm under pressure.
Okay.
They can think logically, things slow down for them. Whereas for other people, they become more frantic. So we all have our own tendencies in how we respond to stress. But I would argue anybody in some of the scenarios that we went through
Yeah.
today, that's a high degree of stress, high degree of uncertainty. There are special people who are able to adapt to that set of circumstances and continue to push forward. And in all of these incidents, you had leaders who did those very things. But I think it's important to understand that even though they are still functioning and still making decisions, there are gaps in their understanding where there could be a potential tool that they could rely on that would ease some of the complications associated with that decision making.
In a situation where you have some time before a disaster happens and, like for instance, in a hurricane, you have some degree of certainty that the hurricane is gonna hit, you have some time to inform people to leave. How, is it common or do local governments have information of who should leave first? Because I would assume, like, different people have different degrees of risk aversion.
Right.
And so, let's say that you have some very risk averse people who are in areas that are probably not gonna get impacted as much. And they decide to leave early, and then that could create inefficiencies on like the escape routes, right?
Yeah.
Like that could create congestion that maybe blocks off pathways for people who are actually gonna
No,
go
that's
affected
a
first.
good point. And I think that's a layer of analysis maybe we can consider thinking through for the work that we're doing. But to your, to answer your questions, emergency managers do have a sense of where communities are most vulnerable, whether it's because of location, whether it's because of the makeup of the communities, maybe you have more elderly, more folks who have, physical challenges that might make it difficult for them to evacuate. And so in that regard, when a mandatory evacuation is called, everybody gets it, right? But the police and firefighters might be prompted to make sure that these communities really get evacuated. And then there are sometimes, didn't do the best job at this when we were doing that first survey, but what I was trying to show on that map, that was just off a map, but that there were some areas that were more flood prone than others. So if you were to look at that potentially look at a map and you know where you live, you could say, oh, okay, my community is definitely gonna be experiencing flooding, so I should evacuate, or I'm not as at risk. Where the gaps are to me right now are that, yes, you can look on TV and see the map, but if the governor's calling for an evacuation or the mayor's calling for the evacuation, you're just hearing that, you might not necessarily go to think where you live, hence the congestion and all those things. So it's a good question. Just quickly looking at some of the emergency manager, we know the importance of emergency managers. They serve as an important link between the tools and the public. So gaining understanding of what impacts their decision-making can help inform the effectiveness of decision support tools. So I've been engaged in work with some scientists at the National Severe Storms Laboratory, one of NOAA's labs. My slides are telling me I'm talking way too long now. Since 2016 to about 2021, I should say. And then I was a part of a PIRE research project funded by the National Science Foundation, where we looked at comparing some of the challenges here in the US with emergency managers and in Taiwan. And so we ran a bunch of different experiments looking at their decision-making with different kinds of weather forecasts. So these emergency managers, weather forecasters, and broadcast meteorologists making decisions based on weather forecast, and they were using a set of tools. Not going to go all through all of this because I've talked way too long, but we were testing a bunch of things, looking at what I was most interested in. Everybody that was a part of this research had their own research interests, but we worked collaboratively. And with the NOAA work, we were basically using the tabletop exercise approach, where we did pre and post questionnaire and then interviews, pre-experiment surveys, post-experiment interviews. Sorry for the typo there. Again, maybe I didn't say this, but I was most interested in what are the internal and external factors that impacted decision making. Just going to highlight what's most important here, I think, for the work that we're doing, is that participants reported an average to low need for closure, desire for definitive knowledge on some issues, or a firm answer to a question, and an aversion to ambiguity. Not that unusual. However, emergency managers that we worked with were very comfortable with uncertainty. In terms of external factors, workplace requirements, training, pressure from media, and political and policy implications were major things that they thought were impacting their decisions. Looking at running an experiment online, looking at some of the same major issues, same major factors as before with the tabletop exercise. Again, here, the major issue I want to highlight is the need for closure. First responders and emergency managers make satisfying decisions, meaning that they make decisions based on discrete information, limited ability to comply or assemble all that information together quickly and in a limited time. Research suggests that first responders tend to rely on system one thinking, heuristics, and intuition based on the online experiment that we ran. Decisions are more likely to be based on previous experiences, what you've kind of talked about before, just kind of highlighting that. People tend to rely on system one thinking during high impact events. And AI can provide a full range of risk or potential threats based on data points that aren't necessarily observable to the people during the crisis, and then emergency managers are burdened with having to appease a variety of different constituents. So having some kind of verification tool or tool that they can assess to help them make decisions might actually alleviate some of those concerns. Current and future work, participating in the tabletop exercise that many people here are working on, continue work with Gretchen, looking at the impact of risk communication messages on behavioral responses. We did launched a survey in 2025. We're doing a new one by May. And continuing with the online experiments with emergency managers. I had some other slides that, again, didn't come into play, but I wanted to highlight that with some of the work that we did last summer, looking at are people open to using, are people open to the idea of first responders and emergency managers making decisions during disasters? About 45% of the sample of about 1,500 people said yes. So there's a high degree of, people are still skeptical about AI and the use of AI in critical situations. So I think there's a need to really better educate the public about where we can actually go with AI.